Dawn, June 9th of 1976, Central Siberia. Lieutenant Colonel Victor Alanin watched as the courier unfolded a large, glossy printout across the operations table. The room fell silent. The photo was angled almost artistic, but there was nothing beautiful about what it showed. There it was, his base, his hidden base, perfectly outlined, every radar dish, every antenna, the SA-5 missile pits, half buried under netting, even the fuel trucks tucked beneath camo tarps, captured, frozen, measured. From above, Alanin's radar array had been operational for only 8 months. They had followed every concealment protocol terrain, masking behind the tree line, netting woven with local foliage. Emission blackout during non-alert hours. Dummy decoy sites built 15 kilometers away. He had believed they were invisible. But now, the Americans had photos, not guesses, not estimations, images. Sharp, precise, undeniable. This is from the Keyhole series. A GRU officer muttered, KH-8. Orbital pass over Sector 14 at UR-411. No contrails, no jet engine, no flyover to intercept, no warning. Just a silent overflight, then Alanin's secret laid bare on a U.S. analyst's desk. The most terrifying part. They hadn't fired a shot. They didn't have to. They had seen everything. And seeing, in war, was power. 6 months earlier, Soviet Air Defense Command, Moscow. The briefing room was thick with confidence. On the central wall hung a classified chart titled Object Protection via Terrain and Emission Discipline. It outlined the Soviet Union's belief that with the right concealment, radar bases could operate beneath notice even under hostile reconnaissance. You cannot photograph what you do not see. Marshal Alexei Kostin declared, tapping the chart with his pointer, visibility is defeated by silence and soil. Kostin wasn't just posturing. He had written the doctrine. Soviet air defense sites were constructed in forests, behind hills, inside old quarries. Camouflage nets were designed to mimic local vegetation. Generators were buried. Vehicle paths were randomized. MCON protocols restricted all emissions outside brief test windows. Quotes from Doctrine Light is defeated by shadow. A base that does not speak is a base that cannot be heard. Space sees broad shapes. We show it none. Credential dropped Upper 1. Marshal Kostin had overseen the design of over 60 radar sites from Murmansk to Mongolia. He insisted that terrain could swallow installations from aerial eyes. To Soviet planners, the idea that satellites could see past forests, nets, and silence felt absurd. We do not fear the sky, one colonel said. We use it, but the Americans had stopped using pilots and started using orbits. What the Soviets viewed as concealment, used analysts saw as patterns. The doctrine was certain what couldn't be seen, couldn't be struck. They never planned for something worse, being seen and not knowing it. Soviet air defense concealment doctrine wasn't improvised, it was engineered. Each radar site followed a rigid protocol designed for one goal, vanish into the terrain. The 4 pillars, camouflage nets, woven with synthetic leaves, tailored to seasonal colors, draped over antennas and launchers. Terrain masking sites, placed in valleys under tree cover, or behind ridge lines to block line of sight from reconnaissance aircraft. Dummy installations, decoy antennas, inflatable radar domes, and mock missile canisters placed kilometers away to mislead. MCON emission control strict limits on radio and radar use. No test emissions during daylight, no idle broadcasts. These weren't suggestions, they were orders. Credential drop number 2. Colonel Sergei Dubrov, one of the architects of mobile radar concealment, had spent years developing deployment patterns designed to evade aerial detection. He once said, "If they see you, they can kill you. So don't be seen." And it worked for a time, against aircraft, against U-2s, against the line-of-sight cameras. But no one recalibrated for satellites. Soviet doctrine assumed aerial ISR was limited by angle, by atmosphere, by pilot risk. But spy satellites changed the geometry. They didn't fly past sites, they flew over them. No horizon, no forest edge, no bluff line could hide from a vertical descent. Worse satellites returned again and again, mapping shadows, changes, construction, and the doctrine didn't account for that. They had trained to hide from eyes. They never imagined they'd need to hide from orbits. EO-300. GRU analysts unfurled the first image from KH-8 GAMBIT satellite pass, 281-0300-15. Radar dish clearly visible through camouflage net, EO-330. SAM revetments outlined, positions matching topographic assumptions. EO-345. Fuel truck silhouettes, power cables, vehicle tracks, everything exposed. Each photo wasn't just a snapshot, it was a confession, coordinates, layout, even operational status. Soviet officers stared. One base commander muttered, "They built a map without ever stepping here." The photos were sharper than expected. Grain details showed tire tread patterns. Tree lines ended too uniformly, revealing artificial boundaries. Credential drop, Shipper 3. Senior photo interpreter assigned to the case noted, "They didn't find our bases by heat. They found us by habit." Thermal shadows betrayed generators hidden under tarps. Antennas left slight distortions in nearby snowmelt. Trees planted to blend sites left geometric spacing, perfect squares that forests don't grow in. Every design meant to hide became a signature. And these images weren't isolated. Over 2 weeks, analysts reviewed 23 different sites, 17 of 20 SAM positions visible, 9 of 11 radar installations identified. Even mobile units caught mid-deployment. The camouflage hadn't failed. It had been interpreted. One analyst whispered, "This isn't surveillance. It's archaeology. They're digging us out of the forest for decades." Soviet air defense believed it was unseen. That belief didn't die in a battle. It died on a piece of film. The first official reaction from Soviet high command denial, the report was annotated with red ink images, lack verification, photographic distortion likely, American propaganda. A memo from General Yuri Sokolov, Deputy Chief of Air Defense, ordered a review of the imagery's authenticity. His margin notes read, "No terrain in that region matches these dimensions. Confirm against Soviet topographic maps." They refused to believe the Americans had seen these sites because it meant everything they knew about concealment was flawed. Credential drop. 4. An internal investigator from the PVO Academy wrote, "Assume deception until source is authenticated." Emission blackout renders these images unreliable. They blamed sun angle distortion, overexposure of infrared film, misidentification of natural terrain. Even the presence of clear vehicle tracks was waved away. Could be agricultural equipment, could be civilian access roads. Instead of adapting, they dug deeper into disbelief. No adjustments were made, no doctrine was updated, no terrain masking protocols changed. A Lenin's base, still on alert, still hidden in their eyes. The idea that the enemy could see without being seen broke something fundamental. Soviet doctrine didn't just protect locations, it protected assumptions, and those assumptions were now visible from space, when the evidence became too consistent to ignore. Soviet analysts reached for a more comfortable explanation: American forgery. The new theory, U.S. intelligence, had doctored satellite images, digitally enhanced or manipulated film to simulate radar bases. The logic shadows could be drawn. Structures could be pasted from other images. Camouflage breaks could be artificially inserted. A technical panel from the Ministry of Defense reviewed film grain and alignment marks. Their conclusion, unverified sources. potential fabrication via Western photo labs. A counter-narrative emerged. The Americans wanted the Soviets to panic. These weren't real images, just psychological operations. Strategic deception, not actual surveillance. Credential drop in an emergency Warsaw Pact briefing. General Mikhail Osipov declared, "This is not photography. It is theater." Command issued new training circulars. Emphasize confidence in concealment. Deny validity of foreign imagery. Warn against overreaction to Western manipulation. The goal wasn't to solve the problem. It was to preserve the illusion. Because accepting the images were real would unravel everything that the forest didn't hide. That silence didn't cloak. That terrain wasn't protection. So they taught their officers. If you weren't seen, you weren't targeted. But the truth was darker. They had been seen, and now they were being measured. When forgery failed as a theory, Soviet intelligence turned inward. The next explanation, betrayal. High-ranking officers proposed that the Americans had ground-level intelligence traders leaking base layouts, construction logs, or deployment timetables. The KGB launched Operation Glasnost Maskirovka, a counterintelligence sweep across 5 districts. Investigators reviewed construction worker backgrounds, fuel and equipment delivery records, communications between radar units and logistics hubs. Every anomaly late truck, missing part. Unusual visitor became a potential leak. Credential drop. A GRU field officer's note to command read. Satellite clarity cannot explain alignment precision. Human error is the likelier source. They interrogated signal officers, reviewed classified disposal logs, re-verified camouflage inventory manifest, but no breach surfaced. No logs were leaked. No maps were missing. And yet, the images remained correct. Photos from multiple overpasses, weeks apart, showed consistent, aligned data right down to shadow length and heat bleed from fuel stores. Still, the narrative held, "They know because we told them." This hunt for saboteurs created paranoia. Officers mistrusted maintenance staff. Radar crews locked storage sheds between shifts. Camouflage netting was signed in and out like weapons. But the truth wasn't betrayal. It was technology, not treason, observation. They were scanning for whispers while the Americans were watching from 160 kilometers above. The KGB and GRU launched a full-spectrum intelligence recovery plan. They called it Operational Reconciliation. Objective verify whether U.S. imagery matched actual Soviet infrastructure and, more critically, how. Field agents were deployed to inspect installations suspected to have been compromised. Photographs were taken from the ground, site maps redrawn, camouflage netting audited. The results were brutal. Every base matched. The layout, the shadows, the structures. Even temporary elements like mobile radar trucks were captured correctly. Credential drop, number 5 GRU Colonel Anatoly Varenkov, after overlaying satellite images on topographic charts, wrote, "They do not guess, they overlay." Our patterns are in their archives. Cross-analysis revealed that thermal signatures aligned with generator huts, despite them being buried or netted. Tracks leading to supply points were visible in multispectral imagery. Even decoy sites were marked as such and ignored. They weren't just being seen, they were being understood. The KGB issued a chilling report. "We have lost informational terrain. Visual ground is no longer secure." Analysts now realize the Americans used no single source. They fused overhead imagery, signal intercepts, movement analysis, satellite IR overlays. This wasn't surveillance. It was precision mapping. Soviet concealment wasn't failing. It had been replaced as a concept, and no one had told the doctrine writers. The Americans didn't guess where Soviet radar bases were. They knew because their tools made secrecy irrelevant. Technology 1, KH-8 GAMBIT, high-resolution imaging satellite, sub-meter resolution from 160-kilometer orbit. Stereo imaging captured 3D terrain structure. Soviet expectation space-based cameras were too crude. American reality KH-8 spotted tire tracks and shadow lengths. Combat example. KH-8 overflew 3 PVO sites and identified all major radar and missile components. Technology 2 U-2 optical infrared reconnaissance aircraft flew at 21-kilometer altitude. Film cameras with 0.3 resolution. Infrared picked up engine heat beneath camouflage. Soviet expectation netting and tree cover blocked observation. American reality. Heat signatures bled through even buried structures. Example U-2 confirmed thermal presence of SA-5 launchers under snow tarps. Technology 3 Corona Archive imaging. Continuous passes for historical comparison. Allowed U.S. analysts to identify new construction by time lapse. Soviet expectation 1 image is a snapshot. American reality series of images revealed movement and upgrades. Result: Americans tracked radar relocations before doctrine even declared them operational. Technology 4 ELINT Plus. Photographic fusion signal intercepts geolocated radar emissions. Then tied to imagery confirmation. Soviet expectation emissions were hidden by blackout. American reality emission patterns revealed operating cycles. Result: fusion lockdown reel from dummy. Technology 5 Photogrammetry and shadow analysis. Used sun angles to measure building heights and object lengths. Identified radar dish diameters from orbit. Soviet expectation geometry didn't betray function. American reality everything casts a shadow. Example: measured a P-14 tall king array by its silhouette at Orion 41 orbit. Credential drop number 6 NSA photo analyst wrote, camouflage changes color. Shadows do not. The American ISR ecosystem didn't just take pictures. It understood form, function, and timing. Soviet secrecy wasn't defeated by a spy. It was defeated by geometry. It began quietly. A new satellite pass every 48 hours, a new image every 72. Within weeks, the NSA had built a library of Soviet air defense infrastructure, 95% accurate. Micro-narration, day 1. KH-8 overpass, primary radar base logged. Day 2. U-2 confirms IR heat bloom at generator shed. Day 3. Corona Archive reveals structure erected within last 18 months. Day 4. ELINT team geolocates emission burst to exact coordinates. Day 5. 3D photogrammetry confirms dish size and arc alignment. Results: Soviet hidden bases became cataloged entries in use target libraries. They weren't invisible, they were indexed. Scorecard 42 radar bases analyzed. 40 identified via imagery. 35 matched to MCON schedule. 28 classed as strikeable. 0 remained classified as concealed. Credentialed summary. We knew where to aim before the missiles were ever fueled. Reversals. They believed in forest camouflage. The Americans mapped it by shadow bleed. They believed terrain protected. The Americans used orbit to eliminate terrain. They believed silence was safety. The Americans used silence as a signal. Key statistic. Over 80% of Soviet camouflage sites proved ineffective under infrared and stereo imaging exposure. What doctrine had defined as invisible was now part of a global target grid. Soviet silence had worked against what they understood, but technology had redefined visibility, and it had done so quietly. By 1977, a classified Soviet assessment quietly admitted the truth. Air defense concealment principles are now obsolete against orbital reconnaissance. 4 doctrinal failures emerged. 1. Concealment versus multispectral detection. They had hidden visually, but satellites saw in infrared, ultraviolet, and radar bands. Soviet quote paraphrased, "We train for eyes. They use lenses." 2. Static hiding versus dynamic mapping doctrine assumed fixed images. Americans used time-lapse from repeated orbits. Every tent moved. Every shadow shifted. Every generator puffed heat. Soviet quote, "A base that breathes cannot stay invisible." 3. Silence versus pattern recognition. Emission control hid signals but not behavior. Repetitive schedules, track marks, and access paths became signatures. Soviet realization discipline reveals as much as noise. 4. Trust in deception versus trust in measurement. They assumed the enemy relied on guesswork. Instead, the Americans measured angles, lengths, footprints. Quote, "We faked noise. They calculated height." The shift was philosophical. Concealment had been the pillar of air defense. A base was safe if it could not be seen. But now seeing had changed. Not through magic, not through spies, through physics. Credential drop. Soviet imaging engineer reviewing KH-8 data in 1978 confessed they made the sky not just a place to watch from, but a ruler to measure with. And measurement couldn't be deceived. The photo lay on the table, high resolution, monochrome, taken from 160 kilometers above. At the center, a forest clearing, barely visible beneath a faint mesh pattern, a Soviet radar dish, precisely measured at 12.6 meters across. In the corner of the frame, a handwritten American label, P-14 Tall King, operational, concealed, not hidden. It was not a strike photo. It was something worse, a mirror. Proof that every camouflage doctrine, every silence-based protection, every belief in invisibility had failed. The Americans hadn't destroyed the base. They had seen it, measured it, logged it, prepared for it,